Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Alchemize with Alanna. This is where we explore internal landscapes that shape powerful leadership, emotional undercurrents, moments of disruption, and intuitive intelligence that contributes to our next evolution. Today's conversation is meaningful and timely. And yes, I'm visiting family for Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving to you. And I'm in my brother-in-law's man cave, where he is in love with Jeeps. So that's what you'll see around me. Anyway, as far as being timely, and the guest that I have today purposely wanted to talk with me around this time because these times aren't necessarily joyful for everyone. Many people move through the holidays carrying grief, grief from loss, from change, from identity shifts, which, by the way, I'm kind of going through one myself, and I'll share some information slowly over time. Also, grief from expectations that don't match our perceived reality. And for leaders who are conditioned to stay composed, strategic, and have that strong persona, grief often gets buried instead of explored. So my guest today is someone who has spent over 2 decades studying and working with grief in many forms. His name is Jock Brocas, and he's an internationally known researcher in grief, mediumship, parapsychology, and spiritual crisis. He works privately with high-performing CEOs, lawyers, and individuals navigating moments that demand deep intuition, clarity, and courage. And when I think about grief, which hits me in the throat, I notice that sometimes I can't breathe, I retreat, I sometimes want to be alone. And I've experienced it from job loss myself, disappointing and loss of friendships, financial strain, and changes that I didn't see coming. So these experiences have also altered who I've become in ways that I couldn't have foreseen. They've made me more compassionate, flexible, kind to myself and others, and patient and open. So before we dive in and welcome my guest, I always like to hear from the audience. What comes to mind when you think of grief, and how has it shaped you as a leader or as a living soul? Whether it's your own experience or what you've observed in others, share it in the chat and just share what comes up for you. And also, as I have this conversation with Jock, we encourage comments or questions so that we can address them in the moment. And if we don't get to them, please share them anyway, because I'll come back to the questions and be able to address them. So Jock, welcome. As we're waiting for Jock.
Thank you, Alanna. Thank you for your wonderful welcome. I was wondering there if I had to press anything else. I've just been so confused with this platform. But thank you for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. So you've spent your life at the intersection of grief, intuition, and high-stake decision-making. And from your work as a medium and parapsychology research, and being called in for crisis situations like the LA fires that you were talking about, as well as guiding leaders and public figures who can't always show grief publicly. And you too have experienced profound loss. When we when we met, you shared that you lost multiple family members just in the last year.
That's right.
We also talked about how this kind of work goes beyond just death.
Yes.
And you explore, and I appreciate this, grief as something that's very much tied to our identity, our work, meaning in our lives, sometimes trauma. And then I find this piece fascinating, intuitive forewarnings. So I'm honored to have you here because I don't talk about this very often, but this in the background, this is very much a lot of how I experience life and connect with my own spirituality. And so my first question for you is, being that grief isn't just about death, and it does relate to identity, faith, and the expectations that we carry, how do you define grief in a way that expands how leaders understand it?
Quite simply, I mean, the best way to explain anything is to explain it in simple terms, but grief is a journey. And we have to look at grief as being that journey. And it's also to understand that grief is not something that we can heal. It's impossible to heal it. And when people talk about, I'm going to heal through grief, and we tend to then compartmentalize grief as a loss of just a loved one, someone with death and dying. We think of grief, we think of death and dying, and we think about that human death and crossing over to the other side. But we have to recognize that grief is in every single element, every single part of our life. And so it's part of the journey of life. And I always say to people, no matter if you're a leader or whatever, executive, C-suite executive, a lawyer, military operative, grief is your greatest teacher, or it can be your greatest nemesis. It's up to you how you choose that.
I love that, because that I will often talk about the power of choice and how we have the power of choice in any given moment. And it's all about even choosing to exercise that choice and do something with it or not. And the perception of what life is throwing at us, because we can't control what happens out here per se. So I love that you say that we can't heal it, because that's probably challenging people's perception.
It will.
Yeah. And you don't hear that very often.
We have to integrate it, because it is a journey, and integration, and any trauma we have to integrate. Anything in life we have to integrate. The move to a new job, the move to, where you're from, another country, and where I came from, another country, we have to integrate. Everything in life is about integration, and how we integrate our emotions, how we integrate ourselves into society. It's all about integration. And once we become more aware of that, it becomes more of something that we can conceptualize and accept it. To change anything in life, you first have to become aware of it, and then you have the choice, right? You have an awareness, and then you have the choice, and then you have action. So it's up to you whether you take that choice. You choose to take action on it. And so we have to, when we understand that grief is that journey, it's not something we want to, it's not something we heal from, but it's something that we integrate, then it becomes a journey of discovery. And it can either make or break us.
So what I'm hearing in that is, you didn't use this verbiage, that how I'm processing it is embracing it, and it becomes, it's not healing from, it's healing with.
Yeah. It's you have to take it into you, and it becomes part of you, right? Because that's how we assimilate things. At the end of the day, it's like anything that we put into our bodies. If we put good things into our body, we assimilate good nutrition, we feed our cells, and we get the benefit of that. Anything that we listen to on TV, if we assimilate the negative, then we get affected by it. So grief is similar. No matter no matter what type of loss it is, we assimilate it, and it can either feed us or it can starve us. And we have to look at it as something that is better to embrace it, to become aware and to embrace it as part of the journey, because we can't escape it. There is not one person out there in life that escapes grief. We don't.
Yeah, I see leaders. Especially, and leaders, I'm just going to say this too, because every once in a while people will start talking to me about their family relationships too. So there's this protection, this need to protect. And when leaders do things to protect others, I understand why they're doing it, and I help them process out loud why they're doing it, and also help them recognize how it can, in an unproductive way, cause enabling or actually taking an experience away from somebody else that possibly needed that experience to grow and develop as a person.
Absolutely. And also we mustn't forget as well, Alanna, that leaders don't escape it either. Whether you're famous, world famous, whether you are in a strategic role, or you are a leader of a multi-billion-dollar organization, yeah, I get what you're saying. You don't want to take that experience away from anybody, because it's part of their journey. It's how they grow. But also, a leader, unfortunately, is often held back is behind the curtain, because they have this perception, or others have an expectation of a leader, that they have to be strong, they have to make their decisions, they can't be seen to be weak, they can't be seen to falter in any way. But our greatest strength is in recognizing the emotions that we have. And what makes a great spiritual warrior is the warrior that is able to stand up and ask for help, rather than just hiding behind the curtain.
I love that. It's about acknowledging the spiritual warrior in all of us. And really
Absolutely.
quickly, as far as acknowledging, I just want to say a quick hello to Braxton Whaley. Thanks for being here on the show with us. And speaking of, we also have Ted. Hi, Ted. And John. Thanks for being here. So one of the things that, in terms of ignoring it or not acknowledging it, like what happens when leaders don't acknowledge or ignore grief?
When they don't acknowledge it and they ignore it, they actually get themselves into a spiral. They can go into what's called spiritual crisis, and that crisis can be a crisis of identity. It can also be a disconnect. Think about even the disconnection they have between their family life and their corporate life, or their company life, or even their disconnect as a leader. You know, if we look at special forces operations, military people, you know, they lose people on the battlefield, and they have to operate strategically, and they often have to close themselves off emotionally. But you find then that what happens on the aftermath is that they struggle and they suffer even more. So while a leader is going through this and they're not embracing, they're not integrating grief into their environment and their life, they're not only disconnecting from who they are, but they're disconnecting from the company, they're disconnecting from their passion, they're disconnecting from their meaning, they're actually disconnecting from self. And so they do themselves a disservice, rather than actually showing themselves as being strong and having no emotion and not dealing with it. At the end of the day, even Steve Jobs, he probably had more regrets at the end of his life than he did any other time, because you realize what then is more important.
Yeah, and there's again, I'm also hearing in that the practice of avoidance, and
Yeah,
that comes up in some of my conversations as well. From it's experienced as a disconnect, which can then people will experience that from someone who is disconnected from themselves, or they're disconnecting from the emotional life of what's really going on, and others feel it, experience it. They might not always fully understand it or make sense of it, but they are. Can you and we get triggered also by some of the smallest things that can shift us in those little moments throughout the day. And it can even be like a memory from a smell, or like a sudden emotional shift. So can you share an experience that illustrates how grief lives in the everyday?
I mean, you can get triggered. Grief can be triggered in so many ways. As I told you before, I had, my wife and I, we were separate last year for Christmas. We lost people very, very close to us, and my wife had to go back to the UK, and I had to stay here, and it was very difficult. But we can get triggered by so many different things. People get triggered. I mean, I've dealt with people who have had loss and my own loss throughout my life, so I become a bit of an expert in loss. And the least little thing can trigger you. A memory, watching something on the TV. I'll give you an example without even losing, losing a loved one. I'll give you an example of something I was watching the other day. I was watching a documentary, I was watching a show, and something hit home. And the grief that I felt was not about a death. The grief that I felt was about a disconnection. The grief that I felt was making the wrong choice. And the grief that I felt was, how did that choice that I made impact others that may have led to their demise? So we can be triggered in so many ways. And a song can trigger you. As you said, a smell can trigger you. Even being in a coffee shop and listening to someone say something at another table can be enough to trigger you. But here's the power in that. when you recognize the triggers, when you become aware of what triggers you, that is the first step of being able to turn the trigger into a power.
Yep.
Become your superpower.
That's the embracing. That's the acknowledgement. That's the versus being avoidant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turn your triggers into something that serves you. We tend to think of a trigger as something negative because we pull a gun. You know, if I shoot a gun, you trigger it, right? We have this negative aspect to it. But if we can be aware of what's triggering us, maybe we have an awareness of a particular sound or a musical thing that we hear, and it triggers us negatively. Well, when we become aware of it, we can then go, oh, wait a minute, is there another memory that I can bring forward that turns that negative trigger into something positive? Maybe it was the time when you and your loved one, it might have been their favorite song, but maybe you danced with that person. Maybe you heard it when you were driving on a journey, and you know that journey was exciting. So maybe you go beyond what triggers you and you create the memory, and you have gratitude about the memory. You start to have an element, and we're talking about Thanksgiving now. So, you know, we're thankful, so we can take a level of gratitude. And this is another thing that people don't understand. Gratitude, they seem to think they'd be thankful for something. I'm thankful for my life. I'm thankful for the food I have. But you can't truly be thankful unless you go into the story of it, unless you actually go beyond it. If you're sitting and you're eating turkey on, you know, Thanksgiving Day, where did the turkey come from? Who made it? Who brought it through? What was the journey? When you go deeper and deeper into it, and you bring all aspects of your mind, your body, your soul into connection, then it's very easy then to turn negative triggers into positive triggers.
Absolutely. Well, and with that too, being the holiday season and the timeliness of this, what I've noticed about people and working with lots of them over almost 21 years is there are people who, so there's the past, the present, and the future, right?
Yeah.
And there are some people who live very much in the past. They're very nostalgic. They're always showing old pictures, talking about old stories, you know, back in the day, right? Or people that have passed on. And there's a really deep emotional connection to that. And then there's people that very much live in the future all the time. They don't acknowledge the past, possibly because it's too painful. And they haven't processed a lot of what's happened in their lives, and they're maybe not ready to. And, you know, the readiness, that's another thing. Right. And then there's the present moment where if you're just so in the moment, which can be a good thing, at the same time, if you're not acknowledging where you came from, if you're not acknowledging the things that made you who you are and the experiences that you've had that contributed to where you are today, and you don't have a vision for your future, then that can have an effect as well. But as far as the holidays and the emotional undercurrents that can be happening, what should leaders be paying attention to, either in recognizing what they're suppressing for themselves or people on their team? What should they be observant of?
You know, and life is about stories. We're great storytellers, and we can cope with things better when we tell stories. This is why before language came, memory was built on stories. I mean, if you go back to ancient Sumeria, or you go back to ancient tribes that didn't have language, this story, you know, their stories were through their expressions, their art, and their creativity. And I think leaders have to become storytellers in their own lives. And when they become storytellers, they can also recognize the stories in others. And they can maybe listen to those stories, learn. The greatest power that we have is active listening. And when we listen to other people's stories, we become submersive. So I'll give you an example. I will never say to anybody, I'm sorry for your loss, because I'm not sorry for your loss. But what I'll say is tell me a story about that individual, or tell me a story about how you feel. Tell me, describe to me, you know, something that happened to you, or something that made you smile. I never want to, feel someone's loss by using that term, I'm sorry for your loss, because we can't, everybody's loss or everybody's experience is unique and different. But we can join in everyone's story. It helps us to tell our our stories as well. And leaders, they may be storytellers in their business to develop leads, but they need to be storytellers in their life to be able to recognize the stories of others and to be able to serve others. And by learning and becoming part of their story, there's nothing better than becoming part of someone's story.
I love that, because it's another form of acknowledgement that we've been talking about. And, you know, it's funny because I never felt comfortable saying that. And then there's the, you know, I don't even know. Sometimes I'll say, I don't even know what to say. But what and I will sometimes say, and I'd love your thoughts about this too, is sending you condolences while you celebrate their life.
Yeah.
To remind them that, you know, having that person in their life, you know, it was, and it still is, a reason to celebrate.
Absolutely. And you know, people can say things glibly because we have an expectation that we have to say, I'm sorry for your loss, or I'm you know, here's my condolences and things like that, where that falls on deaf ears because they hear it so many times. But if someone is heard and someone is not frightened to share how they feel, that can be such an amazing transformation. And it can help you turn a spiritual crisis into a spiritual emergence, if you like. You know, I often say to people who are grieving the loss of people, and I'll give an example, you know, losing my mother-in-law last year, who I absolutely adored. I remember being in a coffee shop and the person, you know, asked, you know, how I was, and I just broke down, right? Some people, other men may think that's a weakness, but to me, that was a strength. And then I could share in that story. And the minute I felt free to be able to express how I was feeling, I was then able to recount the things that made me smile, the things that made me laugh. And then they may come back and ask me questions, or they may even recount their own story, in which case we share. Yeah. You know, I think the Native Americans are great about sitting around in a circle and sharing a talking stick, because sharing is a problem. And you hear that. I can't remember the exact words, but sharing is a problem half. But who knows that in me telling my story, I may give someone the freedom of expression to share theirs. And isn't that a wonderful, beautiful connection that we can have?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. So
instead of saying, I'm sorry, because you can't, because that's what's expected of you.
Right. Yeah. And it reminds, I'm going to be really cognizant of that going forward. Because I'm not sorry that that person was ever in their life, especially because they meant something to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the audience, I know we've been talking a lot about the loss of people in our lives, but here's a question for the audience. What's one form of grief that you've experienced that wasn't about losing a person? How did you experience that? So this moves me into the next topic of understanding spiritual crisis in leadership. Is that also, even though it's not talked about in that way, it can be experienced in that way. And, you know, you've worked with CEOs, lawyers, public figures, people who are always expected to be decisive and composed. So what does spiritual crisis look like in leadership, and why do you think it happens?
Wow, spiritual crisis is very close as well to grief, but it's kind of different. A spiritual crisis can be the disconnection that you have in finding meaning in what you're doing. A spiritual crisis doesn't necessarily have to come from any dogmatic faith or any religious. You know, you could go into a spiritual crisis not knowing who you are, not feeling disconnected from your impact. You know, feeling that I'm around this hamster wheel, and why am I here? What am I doing? How much impact am I making? Does this really matter? Then it becomes an existential crisis that becomes a personal spiritual crisis, and you feel disconnected from everything. You don't You don't see everything the same. And spiritual crisis is something that Stanislav Grof dealt a lot with back in the day, and also Saggioli and some of these great philosophers, where they look at something that is not right in themselves or right in the individual. And a spiritual crisis can be an existential questioning, not understanding their place in life, not understanding their place in work, feeling that they're a fish out of water, and then having that confusion which causes disconnection. And then you can go into, and spiritual crisis can be dangerous because it can lead you into mental imbalance, psychosis, even developing schizophrenia. Spiritual crisis is very, very, very important to understand from a leadership point of view. Your spiritual crisis could develop in a number of ways, and it doesn't necessarily have to come from loss. It could be coming from not sharing in the vision anymore. It could come from recognizing that the direction has changed and it wasn't where you wanted to go, or that you're not serving in the way that you wanted to serve. And a spiritual crisis could be that big question of why.
How does cognitive dissonance play a role in that?
Well, the cognitive dissonance is really, it's very unique, I think, because you tend to you're questioning yourself. You may have a belief in something, or you may have understand something, but it doesn't quite fit who you are. And so your cognitive dissonance is really a catalyst into you moving into the next stage of a spiritual crisis, because you may question what you formerly found was what you thought was the right path. Someone who is maybe, let me give an example, maybe in parapsychology, have evidence that an orb, for instance, they see an orb and they think it's something spiritual, or they believe it with their whole soul and their spirit. They think this is what it is, but the evidence doesn't point to it. And even though they're totally focused on that being a real thing, there's a deep personal fight within them because they have been shown that this is not right. And so they're showing cognitive dissonance. And they just don't know it. And that then can be a catalyst to spiritual crisis, because the cognitive dissonance creates the crisis.
I've been going through that, I think, in many levels over the last 4 or 5 years. And I'm going through another one right now. And I'm listening, if you know what I mean, in a different way. And I'm allowing myself to hear. I'm what is it called? Clairaudient.
Clairaudience, yeah.
Yeah. That's how I hear. It's been very interesting. And with that, so in trusting what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing. Why is trust, or especially self-trust, often the breaking point for leaders in crisis?
Oh my God, you're asking someone here who has a massive problem with trust.
Oh my gosh, you and I
so
relate in that way. That is my biggest thing that I'm trying to have a breakthrough in right now.
And me, for years, I have a problem with now. So I have a problem with trust from various different levels of being let down. At one point in my life, I worked undercover. I worked in strategic security operations. It was very dangerous. There's elements of trust there. And then being intuitive, or utilizing the term psychic, can create a lot more distrust, because you kind of then know when people are lying to you or being deceitful, or you can feel inside of you intuitively, you just know things are not. So then it's a blessing and a curse to have a power of intuition inside of you. Everybody has it, but not everybody uses it to the full potential. And there's an element of people can become very intuitive or very psychic at a certain level, but some people can sing a beautiful aria, but there's other people that can't hold a note in a bucket, and if they're singing, you're like, oh my God, please shut up, because you just, but it doesn't stop them having these intuitive powers. You know, everybody has it, but it can be a curse as well, because it can create distrust, and it has done with me. And I trust more of my intuitive feelings, and I trust more of the spirit. So I'll say to many people, and it's a bit of a laugh here. So anybody's ever watched that Meet the Fockers, and he has a circle of trust, right?
Yeah.
So I've only got like one person in my circle of trust. Everybody is so far outside that line. They're either on the edge of it or they're way over there. And it used to be a big thing in my family. Would laugh. It's like, you know, Jock's circle of trust doesn't exist. It's like a dot. It's not even wide enough to be a circle, you know. So I have a big problem with trust. But when I use my intuition, I find it's easier for me to become more trusting of the information that I'm receiving divinely or inspired than I can in the world and living in this material world. And that's a bit of a cognitive dissonance as well, because I find it difficult to relate and to trust people on this side, but I can trust more of my intuitive senses here. So an example, I mean, sometimes I'll work with lawyers, maybe work on very important cases that could people's lives could be on the line. Now I can take that very, very seriously. I can trust what I'm getting from the other side. I can trust that power and that connection. But it doesn't add up on this side. Right. And so it is very important. So trust is a thing that I can teach it, I can talk about it, but I can't cope with it in my own life. And that's a curse. It is a curse that I'm working through. People laugh because I don't trust anyone. I said don't trust anybody. I mean, if I'm listening, I'll listen to spirit. You know, I trust spirit more than I trust anybody on this side. And again, you know, it can become a bit of a curse, because you know when people are not being truthful or being deceitful, and that makes it worse.
Yeah.
Sometimes ignorance can be bliss, even though we kind of go against that, you know. But I'd rather know and trust my feelings than put my trust elsewhere.
I completely relate to that. And the more that I do trust my intuition and my instinct, the more that I can see who's in front of me and what they're giving to me, and recognize yep or no. And then another piece of it is being able to communicate how to deal with it. And do it in a very graceful, compassionate way that feels true for me. And that's something that I also love helping my clients with as well in their own lives. How do you, for them to trust their instinct, their intuition, and when they recognize something, what are you going to do with it? And then how do you communicate it? Because although, yes, we communicate in a telepathic, energetic frequency way, we also communicate with words. It's just part of our human experience. So I would consider myself to be a communication expert, and I give them the tools on how to do that, and then therefore redefine that relationship or whatever's going on for them.
You know, also I think, Alanna, as well, it can become a superpower, but it can be so dangerous as well. I was once taken into a boardroom, and two people knew what I did and abilities that I had. I was just in as just an advisor, part of the team, and everything was fine in the boardroom. Things were moving, business was being discussed, but I find that there was so much untruth, there was so much lies, there was so much deceit, that when I helped the leader, the CEO, actually awaken to what had happened and what was not being said, it actually broke things right open, and it can become quite dangerous, because in that boardroom we uncovered not only deceit, but stealing within the company and relationships that were not supposed to be that we're having. And that was total ignorance. No one knew nothing before. Now, it did save the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so, but look at what it did to the leader, right? Because that, again, can be a spiritual crisis, because what they thought was totally secure and totally safe just cracks open. And they find that what they had trust in, they have now lost. So it's important that we teach our leaders to discern and understand the power of discernment, and to be able to utilize their strategic intuitive abilities in the right way, knowing that they've got to be open for the good and the bad.
Yeah. That's funny that you say that, because something that I've gotten really conscious of is how we as a race have lost our ability to discern, to have critical thinking, to also with that practice foresight and see what's coming, to make more effective decisions so that you can get ahead of it. And instead of, that CEO being in that boardroom with you in that moment, having you reflect on what's already occurred and then having to deal with that, making powerful choices as a result of having this new insight.
Yeah, as like I said, it's a curse, and it's a hidden power that we all need to utilize.
Yeah.
But I think you get to the point where you can't escape it. You've got to utilize it in strategic decision making. See, people don't understand about intuition. They kind of think, okay, if I get an intuitive feeling, it's an internal feeling that kind of pushes me in this direction. So someone can have an intuitive feeling like, I might not go down that road, something doesn't feel right, and it saves their life. And that's a good basic level of intuition. Or maybe I need to do this today. I'm learning to listen to my clairaudience, my voice, my feeling, my clairsentience. But intuition, strategic intuitive intelligence, comes to the fore when you're in harnessing and discerning the power of your experience, what you have learned, your experience, and the power of your intuitive intuience.
Well, and trusting yourself, because I think right, because I think people get the intuition, and then they either ignore it or they let somebody else talk them out of it. And
a soldier, and here's the thing, like a soldier can be in a battlefield, right? So I'm an ex-veteran myself. So soldier can be in a battlefield, and if they didn't have military training, right, their intuition would mean nothing. It's because of their military training that they get the sense, and they're like, hang on, this is not right. We're going to be ambushed, because I know that this is a perfect area, the environment, I feel it. This is where it could be. But just having an intuition without the training means nothing if you can't discern it.
Well, that requires, it's like working on the business and working in the business, right? It requires you to slow down, take a moment, do things with intention, do things outside of the box of what you're normally doing in your day-to-day, right? And so I could talk to you all day about this stuff. So, but I have another question for the audience that I want to throw out there that kind of relates to some of this, which is, have you ever hit a moment where your outer success didn't match your inner experience, and what shifted for you? So audience, reflect on that, write something down for yourself. And in preparing for today, all of this made me reflect on an experience that I had with a client in a session,
right,
who was processing some deeper emotions around this. I coached him for years, and then he reached back out to me after not working with him in a couple of years because he was in a rough place. He said, the negativity is getting to me. I feel destructive. I don't know why. And what surfaced was something he hadn't connected before, which was his best friend had passed away. And he never allowed himself to grieve. Instead, he did a lot of what high-performing leaders or people do. He just powered through, got busy, carried everybody else's emotions, and told himself he was fine. That unprocessed grief became anger. It affected his patience. his creativity, and the way he showed up even with his family. And he said he didn't recognize himself. So during a session and working with him on this, once he realized that the loss was still living in him, it's that embracement, right, Jock?
Yeah, yeah,
He was
absolutely.
ready. Yeah, he was ready to feel it, and I had the honor of supporting him through it.
That's
And
beautiful.
we explored how he didn't give himself the same kind of kindness or compassion that he gives to other people. And I see this again with leaders too. We talked about martyrdom, what I call healthy parameters instead of boundaries, the importance of doing things that actually fill or refill his soul. And by the end of the session, he said he felt different, not fixed, right? Because it's like you were saying, you can't heal it. He just felt different and lighter. And the
he didn't
shift
love himself.
Yeah. 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 So it felt, it's interesting how we can process it in a certain way to feel more practical and reconnect with positivity in our lives. And then I loved hearing how he felt less burdened and that something for him released. And so this is where I want to share with the audience that I offer a service called the Resolve Session. It's just one session. Yes, I do long engagements, but this is it's an intensive to help you get to the root of something, to untangle emotional knots, see the dynamic clearly of whatever's really going on, walk away with something grounded, honest, and something that you can use immediately. So Jesse's going to share the link in the chat if that's something that you're interested in. So for the sake of time, Jock, I need to move us forward into topic 3, which is strategic, intuitive intelligence for leaders. So I'm learning how to trust that more for myself. That's something that you practice also and are learning to trust for yourself more.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the patterns that you've observed in high-stake environments?
You won't recognize the patterns unless you've got experience, right? Okay. So you can't teach someone an intelligence skill or intuitive intelligence without them knowing and having some experience in the environment they're in. You couldn't take a non-soldier into a battle and have them just utilize how they felt and how they did to move through. It just doesn't work. The same way as with a lawyer, you can't take a lawyer in a kind of different environment they get no training with and ask them to be accurate in their feelings. They may have an element of intuition or a feeling they get from it, but again, you have to have experience in that field. You have to have, so intuitive intelligence is recognizing the patterns from your experiences and then harnessing the power of your deep inner awareness, your intuition, because it is all about patterns. And even your intuition is about a pattern. You may hear something, you may feel something, you may see something, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience, you may know something, claircognizance. These are all great to understand what these clairs are. But without that training, you won't know, you won't recognize the patterns. And I'll give you an example. I was involved many years ago in an operation where I had to gain information and I had to meet people coming from a different country in the UK, and I'd flown to where I was flying to meet them. It didn't happen, but I had enough evidence, I had enough information, pattern recognition, that I understood something wasn't right. And just as we were about to abort, I actually wrote this about in my first book, Powers of the Sixth Sense. Before I was about to abort it, I just took some time to go quiet, and the information came. And while everybody was aborting, I totally ignored everything and I carried on based on trusting what I was feeling. And it turns out that I managed to recover that operation, and it went successful in the end. And I knew things had changed because the dynamics had changed. But hadn't I have had training and recognized the patterns, I would not have been able to discern it and I would have missed it. So it's important for any leader, any individual, to not discount their training, their experiences, and their awareness and the recognition of what's around them.
Which is what's interesting about that is, you didn't say this, but this is how I'm seeing in it, is the connection between the spiritual intuitive intelligence, our own pattern recognition, our ability, and brain science, which is in our biological, physiological nature, right? So what are early signs that a leader should pay attention to when something feels off?
I would say when something feels off, when a leader feels something's off, they shouldn't be looking externally. They need to be looking internally. Why do they feel? We have these things in coaching and mentoring and whatever. You know, why? You know, 5 whys. Why is this? Why? You know. But at the end of the day, we've also got to question ourselves. Why are we feeling this way? What is out? What is my heart telling me, and not my head? We have to bring an element of, you know, you said something earlier when we were chatting beforehand, you know, your logic, understanding your logic, but don't just take logic on face value. Develop the logic where your intuition and your pattern recognition, it becomes much more powerful, right? And I would say that with an individual who is in a leadership role, they have to look at themselves first before they look at the problem existentially, because whatever is inside is what is happening outside.
It's that reflection. It's a projection.
Absolutely. And here's the thing, and like, if anybody's listening out there, if you know what scrying is, and people in years gone past, not intuitives, but psychics or wizards, witchcraft, they utilize scrying. You hear about people, you know, I don't like to use this term, but psychics using a crystal ball, or, you know, people would use mirrors to reflect what we see. But don't forget, a mirror was also used way back in the day, not to reflect what you see, but to see beyond what the reflection is. It was a portal. It was a connection to the other side. A psychomantium that maybe utilize in say grief research or in near-death experiences, where someone will sit in a dark room and they'll have a psychomantium, which is like a reflective surface, a ball. They didn't use that in Egypt to reflect what they see. They used it to see beyond. So a mirror does not always reflect. If you understand its power, the mirror can be used as a portal to the soul to go beyond what the reflection is. And that is how leaders should be looking at things. Like, what are they? Is the reflection is not always what they're seeing. It's always inside it themselves, how they're feeling. Listen to, even looking at patterns in people's behaviors, not just a body language, but what is their body saying, but what is their energy saying, right? And what is my energy saying? How do I hold a room or a conversation? What I say holds power, but what I project can transform. And so it always starts with everything within.
There's always what we don't know, we don't know. So that's where I always suggest, get curious. Don't stop with what it is that you think you're sensing, or you think you know, or what data you have, or what somebody's telling you. Look beyond it and what else potentially is there, and recognize, you know, that there's, go ahead.
There's a little saying that I have that I developed many years ago. The truth is the truth no matter what. It is merely the perception of truth and the expectation of man that changes the truth into a lie.
But yes, I've been saying lately, like, I don't believe you. I don't believe your lie about that.
Yeah. So there's always truth, and truth changes with people. Beliefs change. Beliefs change with the weather. But the truth remains a constant. It is only the perception and the expectation in the moment that changes that transforms that towards the lie.
I've been looking at words in a whole new way over the
Yeah,
past couple of years too. And there's in the word belief, there's the word lie.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I try to always not to say I believe in something. I like to come from a place of knowing. I
Yes.
know something because knowing is divine, and belief and knowledge leads to wisdom. We tend to think knowledge is something we gain in the external world, but wisdom is the connection between the knowledge and the divine. And wisdom is often lost. It's like standing on the edge of that mountain. Like anybody who watched Lord of the Rings, I've said this in one of my things in my YouTube channel, other YouTube channel I have. If you watch Lord of the Rings, you see Gandalf is standing at the edge of the precipice. The orcs are chasing them. There's nowhere to go. And knowledge would tell you, we're done for. But Gandalf's wisdom already made the connection to the divine and knew that what they couldn't see existed. And as he stepped out into the nothingness with faith and trust, lo and behold, the bridge appeared.
Yeah. I often say when you're driving a car at night on a road with no lights, how far can you see in front of you?
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And yet, how fast are you driving? It's that trust and inner knowing, right? And yeah. So, last question for the audience: when has your intuition been right, even when logic didn't agree? So, really stew on that. So, Jock, thank you for your presence and your sharing today. What is one seed that you hope today's conversation plants, especially for leaders who might be silently navigating grief or spiritual crisis right now?
I love the fact that you use the analogy of a seed, because I always say that all I am is a gardener, and I can teach you how to give love to your seed and how to tend it and make it grow. And it's up to you to grow weeds or to grow a beautiful forest. It's your decision. And I would say that the biggest gift that I could say to anybody out there who's a leader is not to be frightened of who you are. Connect yourself with who you are. Stop looking at yourself as someone who lives in the world and become part of the world. To realize that we came from nothing into substance because we are part of the animating force that animates all of life. There is no separation. So understand who you are in the self. Understand that you are interconnected to all that exists. And the only reason you exist is because you're part of the animating force that animates all of life. When you realize that you are not separate from that, leadership takes a new role.
Yeah. We're not just a part of the ripple effect. We are the ripple effect.
You are the wave.
You are the wave. Yeah, I love this. All right. Well, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or connect with you?
I've got so many assets. So my main site that I talk about grief and everything else is jockbrocas.com. It's my personal site. When I'm working with leaders on different ways, I also have 21virtues.org, which is part of my mentoring and is private when I work with personal clients and things like that. But as I said to you earlier on as well, I'm also the founder. I'm the founder and the developer of a holistic network, and I'm also the founder and chief editor of Paranormal Daily News, which is one of the top parapsychology and paranormal magazines online in the world, which is respected as an academic source as well as a lived experience source.
Send me that link. I might want to sign up for that.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. I will do. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. For those that are listening to this episode, I have a gift for you. In pretty much every session I do, sometimes using intuition and processing grief, I help clients with difficult decisions and hard conversations. And so I created the Conversation Prep Toolkit. It's a complimentary guide, so you can download it for free if you sign up for my newsletter. And it helps with moments where you can have more intention, less fear of hesitation, and words that actually land. So go ahead and do that. Jesse's going to share that in the chat. Also, if you're a leader navigating complex emotional or strategic moments, reach out directly. I'd love to work with you. And if today's conversation stirred something for you, again, navigating grief, identity shifts, using intuition or high-stake decisions, I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe to the show, leave a comment about what landed for you, and share this episode with someone else who needs it. So thank you for joining us for Alchemize with Alanna. Again, happy Thanksgiving if you're in the US, and we'll see you in the next episode.